Mr. Chairman, what a pleasure to see you in Beijing.
Good to be here, thank you.
Good to be back, isn't it?
Yes.
Your company, a very influential one, yet remains low-key. But I have noticed so much structural adjustments as a result of all the dynamic changes in the world. Tell me more about your vision behind these structural changes.
And what you see right now that's most important is that markets are developing to an own characteristic and personality. And you can see that in China because the Chinese consumer is a very demanding and a very specific consumer, right? Also quite different to the consumer in Europe and in the US. So what you need to really be successful in China is also an empowered organization in China. And that's what, for example, we just did in the automotive sector. We have an automotive sector leadership completed in China so that they can act independently, very near to the customers, and then also having a good consumer insight.
Recently, I noticed some wonderful conference you have hosted, international conferences, and in which some dynamic voices in innovation have spoken. You were interacting with them. For example, those that are in the AI and also in the electronic cars. So a lot of quotes from there, but the way you ask also shows the deep thinking that you and your company put into to get to the front line of the changes. Tell us more about that.
Well, specifically right now, you see that we have both things happening. On one hand, we sometimes see the world more negative than we have seen it some years ago, right? Because we had COVID and we now have a slower growth. And it all seems to be so difficult, right? On the other hand, you see at the same time a technological explosion happening with the AI technology, which is now extending its capability to language modeling. And that gives us a complete new opportunity. So we have to really go deeper into this to understand what effects it will have. I think it will have profound effects, as the mobile phone, for example, had. We all cannot imagine that we would be taken away by our mobile phones, right? But in the future, I think the generative AI models will have a deep impact on our lives.
Yeah. Of course, this is very general, you just explained. As to exactly how it is impacting on different components of your industry, what are you trying to do now, right now, on the ground?
I mean, the key thing is that with language models, you can generate data. And with these data, we can then use it for example, to make better cars or safer cars. The specific aspect of these models is that they cannot just analyze a picture where you can see then a car, a bicycle, and a light post or something like this, but they can interpret the picture. For example, if they see on the picture a ball coming out of the sideline of a street, the interpretation of that is much easier that after the ball, probably a child comes on the road. So it's a much more dangerous situation than if you would just see the ball. Because driving in a car, you can ride over a ball, not a big thing, right? But if you see a ball coming, you probably should stay on the brakes because there's a child to come.
That certainly is a very vivid example you just give. But what does that mean for you? Because a lot of these innovations you cannot predict. And how it's going to be applied in businesses or in different sectors you are working on cannot be predicted, at least not too much. So how would you be able to plan ahead to prepare something terrific, gigantic to happen?
Well, that's the problem. You can't plan anymore. You have to be elastic and flexible. And that's also for the most modern people you have in your company. So let's say the AI experts that did the neural network work, the deep learning work, they had to rethink their entire work when the new generative AI models came up. And that's kind of the nature of what happens right now. We have to be way more elastic and way more adaptive. And that's, by the way, very typical for Chinese companies and also Chinese people, right? They are adjusting quick to the new environment, to the new technology available, and apply it as soon as they can.
But you are also seeing complexities in terms of technology cooperation. And as a result, some companies have chosen to do two versions. Others have been trying to still think about their way out. What is the general plan that you have in mind, and you're working so hard with your colleagues, especially here in China?
Well, in China, it's a good network to have partners and cooperation partners. So we We are still in the process of funding more new joint ventures, right? So we're extending our partnerships because it makes total sense also to do innovation in China and not just do it the way that you produce something on the world in the US or in Europe, bring it over to China and think you can just sell it. Normally it has to be adopted anyway, and why not just do it with partners in China? By the way, knowing that things are normally moving a bit faster in China, having to be adapted more often, and that's a typical sense of doing also then a second technology path. So in some areas it doesn't make sense to do it twice. In other areas where it's, let's say, consumer oriented or nearer to the customer behavior, it makes absolutely sense to do it twice because it's different.
At the very beginning of China reform and opening up, JV was the idea, right? Joint venture. But now, when we are in a very different stage, obviously you are looking at JV at a very elevated level to be having Chinese partners to go ahead.
Yeah, but still JVs make sense in a lot of cases.
It's like a marriage, isn't it? Everybody have to make it work.
It makes sense when you add two capabilities which are there, right? And you could either do collaboration through contracts, but you can also go through JVs. JVs are a bit more complex to set up, yeah, but because you have to have antitrust regulations and so things covered. On the other hand, you can split the business in various joint ventures. For example, like we did in hydraulics. In hydraulics, we just founded 3 joint ventures with 3 different partners for hydraulics, machine automation, and electrification, because their different characteristics were necessary for different markets, and that makes perfect sense then to go for JVs.
There were hypes about decoupling, you know, words like that, and then they turn into what some call de-risking. Whatever the terminologies, it seems that business community understand it inside out, the real nature of doing business, especially with supply chains and value chains. What is your current interpretation of where we are today?
Well, I still believe that decoupling is a bad idea because it's kind of unlogical that you have one planet and you try to decouple the planet. I mean, we are far beyond that point. We collaborate on all kinds of levels. There is areas of technology where countries and regions want to have, through security precautions, normally want to have an exclusive space. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you decouple. That means you have a different way of cooperating.
And you also need to explain what security is, right?
Exactly.
It cannot be overblown.
No, definitely, and you have to be careful that obviously each thing which you don't do together, so each research which you do twice as mankind is obviously a waste of resources. So we have to be very, very careful that we don't overdo it. A collaboration, especially on the research level, so between young people, for example, should always be promoted. And then on the application level, yes, there can be competitive areas, there can be collaborative areas, and there can also be exclusive areas. But that has always been the case. So I'm not so much afraid of the developments if they don't go too far.
You and your colleagues have been here in China a long time. And you have been very instrumental in providing your thoughts, both to the Chinese leadership and also to the people relevant for making things happen. Tell us more about your updated suggestions and ideas at a time when we are trying to see both sides, quote unquote China and quote unquote the West, are still trying to figure out how can we do the communication more than skin deep.
Well, the key thing, we are here now since 115 years in China, right?
Absolutely.
And we are now with 58,000 people here. So we are not a company which is doing that from the sideline, right? We are in the core of the economy, specifically in the automotive, but also home appliances and some other areas, industry. So the key thing right now, what you see is that the change is happening towards a more content-driven growth. That's really what is this quality development question. And the content-driven growth comes definitely also from this technology side. So, and that's what's this new productivity quality forces, right, which are quoted. So the technology is now getting more and more important. Most key is that you see it also in China, that some areas China is leading in some areas already, which can then be transported also to other areas.
Like what?
Like the new energy vehicles. You see a lot of technology here in a much bigger scale, which are more customers applying with the rise of the Chinese OEMs is a very good example. But also we see it more and more in these mutual supply chains that are built up for sustainability reasons. China has committed to 30-60 targets, right? So you see more and more partners of us now working on sustainability questions. And that's a good thing to monitor and to work with, because that's another way of collaboration. And by the way, that's for the planet.
Finally, before we go, there are some people who have the question about if China working on what China calls the new quality productive forces,
Yes.
mainly to focus on innovation-related industries such as EVs and others, will the rest of the world be once again, as they see it, overblown by the Chinese products? Is that, how do you see mentalities like this?
Always when we see technology, there's a huge way to do competitive work, because the consumers on the world are relatively free deciding what they buy. Yeah, there is some regulation on markets, but guess what? You can still decide in any kind of market, and especially free market economies, what you buy, from which manufacturer and what characteristics. So I'm actually very much for a good offering of products. And if Chinese products are now coming more to international markets, it's actually a better market afterwards, because that will also unlock other innovation from other partners again. And if I see it from the mobility side, it's very good to see new car concepts coming in, specific consumer good targeted cars coming in, also from China, because that's new competition, that's a new offering, that's definitely also a great thing for the consumer. For us as technology providers, we anyway have to offer the full scale of productivity in all areas, and therefore I like also this idea of this new quality productivity drivers of the let's say valuable growth. That is definitely what we do. We are invented for life with our ethos, right? So we want to use technology to bring new products to consumers having a better life. So that's perfectly fitting.
Now I have a much better understanding why you have so many partners around the world.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.